Welcome to Rifle Shooting Seminars. This is the second of 4 sessions. Today's topic is on building a stable position. In the last session, we learned that a centered sight picture is important, but given a choice between a stable sight picture that is slightly off and a shaky sight picture that is perfectly centered when the trigger breaks, I'd take the former any day. This is because with a stable sight picture, you know how much you're off by and in which direction. But with a shaky sight picture, you have no idea where the shot will be when a bullet leaves the bore. In a sense, holding the rifle still is even more important than holding it perfectly centered. In today's session, we'll cover the following subtopics. First, we'll describe the basic positions for ordnance rifle and standard rifle. Then, we'll define natural point of aim and how to achieve it in practice. We'll talk about the correct breathing techniques, and then we'll cover the ins and outs of trigger control. Finally, we'll talk about the theory and practice of follow-through. In Swiss shooting, we use two types of rifles, ordnance rifle and standard rifle. The ordnance rifle can be supported in front with a rest or bipod. In the rear, it must be supported with your body. The standard rifle is much more accurate than the ordnance rifle. As a handicap, the standard rifle must be supported by the body, both in front and in the rear, though the use of a sling is allowed. To form a stable position, you must assemble your flexible body into a rigid platform for your rifle. To accomplish this, you must maximize the use of the hard parts of your body, bones and ligaments, and minimize the use of the soft parts of your body, the muscles. The more relaxed your muscles are, the more stable your position is. The ultimate measure of a stable position is to see no apparent movement in the sight picture. If you put on a magnified scope, you would be able to see some shaking, but the unmagnified sight picture should appear still. If you see any shaking in the sight picture, it means that you still need to perfect your position. Here's the position that I use for the K31. I prefer to use a rest instead of a bipod. The front of the rifle sits on the front rest. The contact point is close to the receiver to minimize stress on the barrel. The contact point should be consistent from shot to shot. The trigger hand firmly grips the rifle while pulling the rifle back into the shoulder. The face makes firm contact with the comb of the stock and applies downward pressure on the stock. I prefer to rest the support hand on the trigger arm, and this allows me to support the bottom of the stock with the web of the thumb of the support hand. Finally, the hips lay flat and even on the mat. With this position, you're basically creating a highly stable tripod with the trunk of your body and both elbows. You're locking the rifle onto this tripod by applying pressure on 3 points: the face, the web of the thumb of the support hand, and the butt plate, which is being pulled into the shoulder. Here's a front view of the position. I like to draw my trigger arm close to the body. This bunches up the muscles on my chest to form a fuller supporting surface for the butt plate. The butt plate should be close to the neck to make it easy for the face to make contact with the stock. I mentioned that I pull the rifle into the shoulder. This is one area in which some muscle tension is actually beneficial. First, it helps lock the rifle into your body. Secondly, it's good for recoil mitigation. With a standard rifle, you have sling tension, which serves the same purpose. We don't have a sling here, so active pulling is required. If you find it uncomfortable to pull on the rifle, it could be that the buttstock is too short for you. You can fix it by extending the length of pull with a Vise butt plate, which comes in a number of sizes. Vise is the only legal aftermarket butt plate for the K31. It's essential for your face to make firm contact and press down on the stock. This can be challenging for the K31 because the stock was not designed with the diopter sight in mind. It was designed for the open sights on the barrel. The diopter sight is much higher. As a result, you can't rest your cheekbone on the stock directly. If you did so, you'd be too low, about an inch below the diopter. Likewise, you don't want your face to hover above the stock and make no contact or very light contact, because then it's not helping to stabilize the gun. Your neck tension would also not be relaxed, and this leads to fatigue and shaking. To achieve cheek pressure, you want a bone in your face to be resting on a hard surface. This can be accomplished one of two ways. One way is to wrap your thumb around the stock and rest the cheekbone on the thumb. This is called thumb weld and is the ideal method. The contact point is forward on the face, and this keeps your head erect. However, only people with large enough hands or long enough necks can use this method. I personally can't. If you can't use a thumb weld, we can resort to a jaw weld. Here you're putting your jaw bone on the stock. This is also very solid. The only disadvantage is that because the contact with the stock is to the rear of your head tends to tilt forward while you're focused on aiming. To compensate, you need to make a conscious effort to keep the head erect. Now let's turn to the standard rifle. In front, the sling turns the supporting arm into a rigid triangle. This allows the arm to be completely relaxed while providing solid support for the rifle. The sling connects to a hand stop, which prevents the rifle from moving forward. The resulting sling tension pushes the rifle hard into the shoulder. The height of the cheek piece is adjustable. This allows the cheekbone to make solid contact with the cheek piece and apply downward pressure. The hips are laying flat and even on the ground. A lot of shooters like to pull the right leg forward, but I prefer even contact left and right. As a result, the trunk of the body and the two elbows form a rigid tripod. The rifle is locked onto this tripod by three pressure points: the shoulder, the hand stop, and the cheek piece. Here's the front view. The trigger arm draws close to the body. This bunches up muscles on the chest to form an even mating surface for the butt plate. The butt plate on a standard rifle is adjustable, at least up and down. It should be adjusted so that it makes complete contact with the body. The stock should be drawn close to the neck. Some people prefer a more outward butt plate, but I feel that a closed stock makes the position more solid. The rifle should not be directly above the elbow. Instead, the rifle should lean inward. If the rifle were directly above the elbow, it could swing either left or right. In contrast, with an inward bias, the rifle could only sling inward and is prevented from doing so by the sling. The inward bias also ensures that the sling is pulling from a neutral position at the back of the arm. You don't want it to pull from the inside of the arm, because that would put pressure on an artery and cause your heartbeats to transmit to the rifle. The positions that I just described are a good starting point for building your own position. If you don't have a stable sight picture right now, you might want to try it out. And by trying it out, I don't mean just one or two shots. You need to give your body time to acclimate to the position. Try it for at least a few live fire strings, and ideally dry firing as well. Also remember that we all have different body proportions. Any position would have to be tweaked and adapted to our particular bodies. This takes time and effort. No matter which position you end up adopting, remember the ultimate goal. If your position is sound, you should see no apparent movement in the sight picture during aiming. Now let's talk about a natural point of aim, or NPA, one of the most important concepts in target shooting. The NPA is the point at which your rifle is aimed while you're in position and relaxed. You want the NPA to be aligned exactly with the target center. With a well-aligned NPA, it's easy to keep the sight picture centered and still. With a misaligned NPA, it's hard to center the sight picture, forcing you to muscle the rifle into the center. This muscling leads to shaking and instability. The difficulty of centering would also cause you to be reluctant on the trigger and likely to run out of breath. Here's how to check whether your NPA is aligned. While in position, close your eyes, relax all muscles in your body, and then open your eyes. Is the sight picture centered? If so, you can begin the shot process. If it's not centered, you need to adjust the NPA. When and how often do you have to check the MPA? You should check the MPA at least when first setting up the position. You want to check at least twice during the setup. Ideally, you want to integrate the MPA checking into the regular routine for every shot. When adjusting the MPA, there's horizontal adjustment and vertical adjustment. Within each dimension, we first make a rough adjustment followed by fine adjustment. Let's start with horizontal MPA for the ordnance rifle. Rough adjustment for the ordnance rifle is done by moving the entire rest or bipod left and right. The sights should be aligned horizontally with the target, while the rifle is perpendicular to the rest or bipod. With the bipod, make sure to know the position of the feet so that in case the bipod slips, you can easily return to the right place. To make fine adjustment, pivot your body around the rest or bipod. You don't want to twist too much though, so make sure that you're already as aligned as possible in rough adjustment. Rough horizontal adjustment with a standard rifle is done by angling the shooting mat. I personally prefer to start off pointing a bit to the left. Fine adjustment is done by pivoting around the supporting elbow, by starting off slightly pointing to the left and then pivoting to the right. I ensure that the shooting jacket is pulled tighter under my body while I pivot, which improves stability. Now we move on to vertical MPA. On the ordnance rifle, rough vertical adjustment is done by adjusting the height of the rest or bipod while you're in position. Try to get it as close as possible. If you're not pointing at the center while in position, adjust the height some more. Fine vertical adjustment on the ordnance rifle is done by moving the support hand up and down on the trigger arm so that the buttstock is moved up and down. Moving the buttstock up lowers the aim. Moving the buttstock down raises the aim. To make rough vertical MPA adjustment on a standard rifle, change the sling length and the handstock position. Lengthening the sling and at the same time moving the handstock forward by the same amount lowers the aim. Shortening the sling and moving the handstock backward by the same amount raises the aim. To make fine vertical MPA adjustment on a standard rifle, you scooch the hips backward and forward, pivoting on the forward elbow. Scooching forward lowers the aim. Scooching backward raises the aim. The vertical MPA is subtly affected by breathing. We take a lot of deep breath when shooting, and when we breathe, our rib cage expands and contracts, and this causes our chest to subtly shift on the ground, and the front sight to settle lower with every breath. To compensate, you actually want to set the vertical MPA not exactly at the center. Instead, set it slightly higher than center. This way, after taking the last breath, the sight picture naturally settles in the center in time for you to aim and fire. Speaking of breathing, let's talk about the correct breathing technique in shooting. Our breathing cycle consists of inhales and exhales. You don't want to shoot right after you inhale because your body is tense at this time. By contrast, right after exhaling, there's a natural pause in the breathing cycle called respiratory pause. This is the point in the breathing cycle when your body is most relaxed, and this is an ideal time to start holding your breath and squeezing the trigger. We now move on to the topic of trigger control. The general principle in pulling the trigger is simple. While the sight picture is centered, smoothly increase pressure on the trigger until the trigger breaks, like a surprise. Jerking the trigger is detrimental to accuracy. In Swiss shooting, however, achieving a smooth trigger pull is a challenge, because our rifles have relatively heavy triggers. The minimum trigger weight for standard rifles is 1.5 kilograms, while for the K31 it's 1.3 kilograms. The heavy trigger makes it hard to complete the trigger squeeze smoothly before running out of breath. Also, it's easy to move the rifle while squeezing the trigger. You might have heard from shooting experts that we need to place the center of the finger pad on the trigger while pulling straight back. This is sound advice, but only for light triggers. With our heavy triggers, this technique doesn't work so well because it doesn't give us enough leverage. For heavy triggers, you need to rotate the finger inward so that the first joint on the trigger finger is butting against the side of the trigger. This gives you better leverage on the trigger, making it easier to squeeze. With a standard rifle, you can achieve the correct finger position by moving the trigger shoe back and forth and by rotating the grip. The ordnance rifle is not adjustable, so you have to position your hand on the stock in such a way that the first joint is in contact with the trigger. The weight of the trigger affects how we grip the rifle. With a light trigger, such as that on a small bore rifle, you want to grip lightly. It's sufficient to simply lay the hand naturally on the grip. With a heavy trigger, however, you have to use some muscle tension to achieve a heavy grip. This has the following benefits. When all of your fingers are applying force, it's easier for the trigger finger to apply enough force to move the heavy trigger. Also, the heavy grip serves to anchor the rifle and prevents the trigger pull from moving the rifle, especially since with a wraparound finger position, we're not necessarily pulling the trigger straight back. When squeezing the grip, you want to make sure that you engage the entire hand, including the base of the thumb, which is the meaty part of the hand beneath the thumb, the palm, as well as the middle segments of all other fingers. In my experience, this way of gripping creates the most stable anchor for the trigger pull. Pulling the trigger is as much a mental game as it is a physical exercise. The trigger pull must be both smooth and decisive. That is to say, you must not hesitate. Otherwise, you risk running out of breath. You must also maintain absolute mental tranquility while pulling the trigger to avoid disrupting the stability of the rifle. This is not easy. Even seasoned shooters can get reluctant on the trigger and experience jitters. Here are some ways to improve the mental game. First, if you run out of breath or get the jitter, stop and start again. If you force the shot, you'll miss and enforce bad habits. The bottom line is that you don't need to shoot a bad shot. Secondly, put time into a lot of dry firing and training so that you drill good habits into your subconscious. This way, when you get into the zone, you're automatically able to exercise the ideal trigger pull. Our final topic is follow-through, another very important concept. What we mean by follow-through is this. In live fire, you need to maintain focus after the trigger breaks until the rifle settles down from recoil. In dry fire, follow-through means that you need to maintain focus at least 1 second after the trigger breaks. When the trigger breaks, a lot of things need to happen before the bullet leaves the rifle. The firing pin needs to go forward and hit the primer. The primer then needs to ignite the powder. The bullet then takes some time to travel down the bore. The purpose of follow-through is to keep the rifle centered and stable before the bullet leaves the bore. Follow-through is especially important for small bore because the slow small bore bullet spends a relatively long time in the barrel. But it's also important for big bore for a somewhat different reason. If you're able to follow through, it means that you did everything right before the trigger broke. You pulled the trigger smoothly and decisively, and you maintain mental tranquility throughout. This is why, as big bore shooters, it's worth our time to work on follow-through. Here's a demonstration of follow-through. On the left is me dry firing, and on the right is a trace from my SCAT electronic trainer. Note how I do not move after the trigger breaks for at least 1 second. The success of my follow-through is proven by the trace. Note how the red line, which represents the movement of the rifle after the trigger break, almost completely overlaps the green and yellow lines, which represent the movement before the trigger breaks. This is a pretty good follow-through. In today's presentation, we learned the major elements of achieving a stable hold. We reviewed the basic position for both the ordnance and standard rifles. We also saw that fundamental techniques, such as natural point of aim, breathing, trigger control, and follow-through, all contribute to keeping your rifle stable. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.